Okay, let's get into it. We are strapping on the tanks, metaphorically, of course, and taking a deep dive into the tech that lets us, actually thrive underwater.
Dive equipment.
Right.
And our source material here is, well, it's massive. It covers everything from these tiny little O-rings all the way up to like super complex rebreathers.
So what's our mission today?
I think it's to give you the ultimate shortcut, a way to get really well informed about this super gear intensive world.
Right.
And the core philosophy right up front is that all this gear is life support, period. So the priorities have to be safety first, then a really good fit, and then comfort, in that order.
Okay, I get the order, but I have to push back a little on comfort being last.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're cold or something's chafing, isn't that just as distracting as a real gear problem?
It absolutely is, and that's exactly why comfort is so critical.
Uh-huh.
But it follows safety and fit because discomfort, it's a distraction that raises your stress levels. And a distracted diver is an unsafe diver. It all connects. If the gear is safe and it fits right, then comfort is the goal that lets you just focus on the dive.
Makes sense. So let's start with the most fundamental piece of the puzzle, the mask. Our little window to the underwater world.
You could argue it's the single most important piece of gear. Our eyes just cannot focus underwater without that little airspace in front of them.
They're made for air, not water.
Exactly. You could have $1 million of other kit, but no mask. You're not diving.
And the materials have changed so much. We've moved almost completely to silicone rubber for the skirts, away from the old neoprene stuff.
Yeah, and that's because silicone just resists oxidation and, sun damage so much better. The old neoprene, it would crack and turn yellow and just fail. Silicone lasts longer, and this is a big one, it's less allergenic for a lot of people. Better seal, better fit.
The designs have evolved too, right?
Yeah.
From those old high-volume masks with tunnel vision.
Right, to the modern low-volume ones where the bottom of the lens is kind of angled inward.
And that's to increase your field of view.
It maximizes your field of vision, yep, while keeping the internal volume low. And low volume is key because it's less air you have to equalize on the way down and way easier to clear if it floods.
And for those of us who wear glasses.
There's a cool detail. So water itself naturally magnifies things by about 25%.
Oh, right.
So for simple nearsightedness, you can just pop in some pre-ground lenses. But if you have like astigmatism or a heavy prescription, you can actually get lenses custom bonded right into the mask.
Okay, let's talk about the surface tool, the snorkel. It feels a bit old school, but it's mandatory. Why when we have a whole tank of air?
Simple. It's all about energy conservation. It's for that long swim back to the boat or the shore without burning through your precious tank air.
And your own energy, I imagine.
Massively. The human head weighs, 7 to 9 kilograms? Trying to lift that out of the water constantly while you're finning? That's exhausting. A snorkel saves all that effort.
Now, here's that aha moment from the research. The size. A longer snorkel seems better, but it's actually worse.
So much worse. It's a classic mistake. A taller snorkel increases what's called dead airspace.
Meaning you're rebreathing your own exhaust.
Exactly. High CO2 air, which leads to headaches, fatigue. And on top of that, for every, say, 15 centimeters of water you add to the tube, it takes about 63 grams more effort just to blow it clear.
Wow.
You want the shortest, simplest snorkel that'll do the job.
All right, propulsion, fins, turning us from clumsy land mammals into something a bit more graceful underwater.
They're all about translating the power from our legs into thrust. And you see two main styles, really.
The full-foot ones?
Like slippers, yeah. Great for warm water snorkeling, maybe some light scuba. But for most diving, you're looking at the open heel adjustable fins. You need boots for those, but they give you the real power.
And they have all these features now, like ribs and channels. But what about split fins? They're marketed so heavily, but a lot of tech divers seem to not love them.
That is a great question. The theory is sound, The split is supposed to mimic a whale's tail, making the standard flutter kick more efficient, less effort.
So they're easier on your legs.
For a casual diver, yes, they can be less fatiguing, but if you're trying to do a frog kick or you need a really powerful push against a current, they just don't have that solid blade to work with. They trade power for comfort.
And the #1 mistake people make when buying open heel fins.
Buying them too small. The foot pocket has to come all the way up to your ankle. If it doesn't, you lose control, you risk cramps, and suddenly your fins are a major distraction.
Let's switch gears to thermal protection. This is where it really becomes survival technology. because the physics of being cold in water are
Oh,
extreme.
oh, they are. Water pulls heat from your body about 20 times faster than air of the same temperature.
20 times. That's a huge number.
It's a massive physiological drain. It's why you need a suit even in like 27 degrees Celsius water just to stop getting tired or scraped.
So the classic solution is the wetsuit. It lets water in, but then what?
It traps that thin layer of water against your skin and your body heats it up. The suit's material, which is closed-cell neoprene, keeps that warm layer from escaping.
Closed cell, meaning the little bubbles inside aren't connected.
Exactly. It's not a sponge. It keeps the water from flowing through the material itself. That's different from open-cell neoprene, which you see in freediving suits. That stuff is spongy and needs lubricant to put on, but it creates this incredible vacuum seal.
So for a wetsuit to work, the fit has to be perfect.
It's everything. If it's a bad fit, cool water just flushes in and out, stealing all that warmth.
Which is why you see those two-piece Farmer John styles for colder water.
Right. You get that double layer of insulation over your core, your torso, where it matters most. You can get up to like 12 millimeters of protection there.
And for the ultimate cold water solution, you have the dry suit. This is a whole different ballgame.
A total engineering leap. It keeps you completely dry by surrounding you in an insulating layer of gas.
Air, usually.
Usually air, but sometimes argon, which actually insulates better. That gas layer is what's keeping you warm.
And there are two types, right? Neoprene and shell, with a big difference at depth.
Yeah. The neoprene dry suit material has its own insulation, but it compresses as you go deeper, so you lose warmth.
Yeah.
The shell dry suit is just a thin, tough layer. All your insulation comes from the thick undergarments you wear, and since the shell itself doesn't compress, your insulation stays consistent no matter how deep you go.
But they sound way more complicated, with inflation and exhaust valves.
They are. You absolutely need special training. As you descend, you have to add air to the suit to counteract the pressure to avoid this painful thing called squeeze.
And then on the way up,
You have to vent that air out through an exhaust valve to control your buoyancy and prevent a runaway ascent.
but for diving in temperate water, say 13 to 21 degrees Celsius, it seems like they'd pay for themselves pretty quick.
In comfort and extended dive time, without a doubt. And don't forget the accessories. A hood is critical. You can lose up to 75% of your body heat through your head.
And gloves? Boots?
Yep. And for really cold water, those 3-finger mitts, you lose some dexterity, but they keep your hands so much warmer.
Okay, let's move to the heart of the whole system, the SUBA unit itself, starting with the regulator, the machine that makes it all possible.
It's just a beautiful piece of engineering. Our lungs can't handle the tiniest pressure differences, let alone the 200 bar inside a cylinder.
So it has to step that pressure down.
In 2 stages. The first stage knocks that super high cylinder pressure down to an intermediate pressure, maybe 9 or 10 bar over whatever the surrounding water pressure is.
Okay.
Then the second stage, the part of your mouth, takes that intermediate pressure and matches it precisely to the ambient pressure so you can breathe easily.
You always hear about balanced regulators. What does that actually mean?
It means the breathing effort stays the same whether your tank is full or almost empty.
How does it do that?
It uses some clever internal engineering, a small pressure chamber, to equalize the forces on the valve mechanism, so it takes very little effort to open the valve and get air. It's a huge comfort and safety feature.
We also have the two connection types, yoke and D-ine.
Right. Yoke is kind of the standard for recreational diving. It just clamps over the top of the valve, but the D-ine system screws directly into the valve threads. It's way more secure, it can handle higher pressures, and it's pretty much all that technical divers use.
And the cylinders themselves.
Yeah.
Steel versus aluminum.
Steel is the tech diver's choice. It's stronger, so the walls can be thinner, meaning you get more gas volume for the same size tank. Plus, they're negatively buoyant, even when they're empty, which is a huge help.
The downside is rust.
The downside is rust. Aluminum is softer, has thicker walls, and it actually becomes positively buoyant as you use up the air. But it handles salt contamination better.
How so?
It forms this protective layer of aluminum oxide, which kind of stops corrosion in its tracks. It's more forgiving.
You mentioned overfilling a cylinder is dangerous because of the metal's elasticity. Can you unpack that?
Sure. Every metal has an elastic limit. If you stretch it beyond that limit, it doesn't spring back. It's permanently weakened,
Even if you can't see the damage.
especially if you can't see it. That cylinder is no longer safe. That's why we have burst discs. They're a safety feature designed to rupture at about 140% of the working pressure. If the tank gets too hot, say in a fire, The disc blows and lets the gas out safely instead of the whole tank exploding.
Wow. Okay, that brings us to the BCD, the buoyancy control device. It's more than just a floaty vest.
Oh, much more. It's your whole harness. It does three things. Floats you on the surface, lets you control your buoyancy underwater to offset changes, and it's the harness that straps the whole rig to your back.
And most wreck divers use that jacket-style BCD.
The ADV, yeah, the Advanced Design Vest. It wraps around you, very stable on the surface.
But the technical community has gone in a totally different direction with wings.
The back-mounted wing system, it's a bladder sandwiched between your back and the tanks. It gives you much better trim and less drag underwater, especially with heavy double tanks. A lot of them even have a second redundant bladder for safety.
Let's use the weight system to really show the philosophical difference between wreck and tech diving.
It's a perfect example because the requirements are complete opposites.
For a recreational diver, a quick release system is mandatory.
Absolutely. You have to be able to ditch your weights with one hand in an emergency to get to the surface.
But for a technical diver, doing that could be fatal.
It could be. Imagine you're deep in a cave or on a decompression stop, and you accidentally drop 20 kilograms of lead.
To shoot to the surface.
A rapid, uncontrolled ascent. It guarantees severe barotrauma. In that environment, the risk of that ascent is far greater than the risk of sinking. So they use systems that are much harder to release by accident.
Let's shift to the really advanced stuff. Rebreathers.
CCRs, closed-circuit rebreathers. This is the future for really deep, long dives.
The efficiency is just incredible.
It's a game changer. It recycles your exhaled breath. A chemical scrubber takes out the CO2, and the system just adds back the tiny bit of oxygen your body metabolizes.
So your gas use isn't tied to depth anymore.
It's tied to your metabolism. You can do a 4, 5, 6-hour dive on tiny little cylinders. It's essential for those really expensive deep trimix dives.
But that CO2 scrubber, that introduces a huge new risk, doesn't it?
A massive one. If it's packed wrong or it floods, you can get a catastrophic CO2 buildup. Even worse, if the chemical scrubber material mixes with water, it can create this horrible caustic cocktail that can severely burn your mouth and lungs.
And buoyancy is completely different.
Totally. You can't use your breath for fine-tuning anymore because the volume of the rebreather's counter lung stays the same. You have to be perfectly weighted and an expert with your BCD.
Speaking of precision, let's touch on instruments. Dive computers are everywhere now.
And they give us much longer no-stop times than the old dive tables because they track your actual dive profile second by second.
But the tech philosophy still applies.
Redundancy. Always. You need 2 timers, 2 depth gauges, or computers. Relying on one single device is just putting all your eggs in one basket.
And we're seeing fewer of those big, clunky consoles.
Yeah, because of hoseless submersible pressure gauges. They send your tank pressure wirelessly to your wrist computer. It cleans everything up, reduces entanglement risk. It's a great safety improvement.
Okay, last category, essential accessories. Cutting and signaling.
A cutting tool is non-negotiable. A knife, shears, a line cutter, something to get you out of an entanglement. Tech divers carry 2, one reachable with each hand.
Titanium is best, I assume, for corrosion.
Best by far. And for signaling, you need audible and visual. A whistle is the bare minimum. An air horn that runs off your low-pressure hose is much better.
And for visual.
Those inflatable signal tubes or safety sausages for the surface. And an emergency strobe for night dives.
And at the very high-tech end of rescue.
You have miniature EPIRBs, emergency position indicating radio beacons. You pop one of those, and it sends your GPS coordinates directly to rescue services. A real lifesaver if you get lost at sea.
What an amazing journey through the engineering of survival. From simple silicone skirts to complex rebreathers, and that huge philosophical split between wreck simplicity and tech redundancy, especially with the weight systems.
And that really is the final takeaway, isn't it? When you understand the why behind the gear, why tech divers use steel, why a balanced valve matters, why a rebreather is different, you get more than safety. You get comfort and confidence.
And that lets you enjoy the dive.
Exactly. And protecting that investment with proper care rinsing, storing it right, getting it serviced, that's what keeps your life support system reliable.
Speaking of reliability and limits, we talked about how overstressing a metal cylinder beyond its elastic limit can permanently weaken it.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. If one single event can compromise high-performance metal in a way you can't even see, what other hidden elastic limits are we unknowingly testing in the things we rely on every day? Not just the gear in our dive bags, but maybe even the limits of our own bodies.
Something to mull over. Absolutely. We'll see you on the next deep dive.